Hello, I'm Man in Gray, and welcome to the inaugural video of my new channel, Man in Gray Book Reviews. In this first video, I'm going to tell you a little bit about my plans for this channel, and I'm going to review this book, the first of what I hope to be a whole series of reviews. I'm a retired school teacher, so I've got a lot of free time on my hands, and I'm also what some people would call a fanatical reader. In the last 5 years, I've read over 2,000 books. So some people might say that's some sign of mental illness to read that many books. I read very fast, and I read pretty much all the time. Every spare minute, I'm reading something. And unfortunately for other people, I like to talk about all the books I've read, so I'm bored to death my family and friends with my long rambling talks about books. So I decided to spare them all and create a channel where I would be reviewing some of the many books I've read. Now, if you're like me and you read a lot, you tend to go to YouTube to look for book recommendations. But I've noticed, and I think you probably have too, one of the issues with books on YouTube is that there tend to be, most of the channels tend to be in a very narrow range of genres. There's a lot of channels dealing with young adult novels, young adult fiction. There's also a lot of channels dealing with fantasy and horror books. There's some on comic books and some on westerns and, of course, romance novels. But you don't see a lot of videos dealing with poetry or literary fiction or essay collections or just general nonfiction. You don't see many videos dealing with art books or photography books or reference books or any of those sort of things. So what I'm going to do, not only do I read a lot, I also read very widely. So what I'm going to do on this video series is try to cover some of the books that are not in the bestseller list, that don't fall into these various genres. I'm going to try to cover books that often don't get covered by other channels. The other thing I've noticed in looking at YouTube videos is a lot of people who do YouTube book channels spend a lot of time talking about everything else but books. And there's nothing wrong with that, but I don't want to do that. I want to just stick strictly to a single book. I'm going to review a single book in each video. I'm not going to do buddy reads. I'm not going to do tags. I'm not going to do book hauls or unhauls. I'm not going to talk about book prizes. I'm not going to ask you to like and subscribe each video. You can if you want to, but I'm not going to ask you to do that. I'm not going to have sponsors and things like that. I'm also not going to talk to you about my personal life. I'm not going to show you my pets. I'm not going to cook. I'm not going to go outside and show you my vacation films or whatever. I'm just going to talk about one single book each video. I'm going to tell you the name of the book, the author of the book, who published it, when it was published, how many pages it is. If it's part of a book series, I'm also going to tell you a little bit about the book series. Then I'm going to give you a short synopsis of the book without giving too much away. And then at the end of the video, I'm going to give you my opinion on which kind of audience, whom would like this kind of book. What's the audience for this typical book? I'm not here to trash books or writers. If there's a book I really hate, and I don't think anybody would like it, I'm simply not going to review it. I'm not here to throw sand in people's faces. If there's a book I've read that I don't particularly care for, but I think other people might, then I will review that, and I'll explain why I think that would be something you'd like to read. So if this sounds like a channel you'd be interested in, you might want to tune in, as they used to say in the old days. And I plan on posting quite a few videos fairly often. So sooner or later you're bound to find a book you're interested in. So let's go ahead and get started with the first book. It's this one, and I'm almost guaranteed that no one on YouTube has reviewed this book. It's The Little Book of Elvis Law, and it's by Cecil C. Couln III, a lawyer in Dallas, Texas. And it's published by the American Bar Association. It was first published in 2013. It's a paperback book, and it's 141 pages. And this is part of a series that the American Bar Association does called the Little Book of Law series. And what they are is there's a short introduction, and then there's a series of chapters about interesting case laws involving a particular topic. Other books in this series include books on hunting and fishing law, fashion law, golf law, barbecue law, outer space, tennis, golf, and many other subjects. But anyway, I picked Elvis because this one I think is a particularly interesting book. As you probably know, Elvis Presley died in 1977, August 1977, at the age of 42. At the time of his death, his entire estate was worth about $5 million, which in today's money, adjusting for inflation, would be about $25 million. That's not a lot of money, considering how many albums, how many records Elvis recorded, how many movies he did, how many concerts he gave. He didn't have a lot of money because, let's face it, Elvis was a brilliant musician, a great musical genius, but he was a terrible businessman. He spent money almost as soon as he got it. But after his death, careful management on the part of Priscilla Presley and others, as well as very clever marketing, allowed the Elvis estate to grow exponentially, so that today the Elvis Presley estate is worth somewhere around $500 million, or $500 million. And that's pretty remarkable for a musician who died nearly 50 years ago. Well, if you've got an estate that's worth that much money, it's inevitable that there's going to be lawsuits brought against the estate and by the estate. This book contains a short chapter explaining the Elvis estate, how it came about, and then there are 19 chapters involving 19 different court cases involving Elvis and his estate. And I want to talk about just a few of them for a minute to give you an idea of whether you'd be interested in this book. For example, one of the chapters, the opening chapter of court cases, is about Elvis impersonators, people who dress up as Elvis and do Elvis songs. Can they just do that on their own, or do they have to get permission from the Elvis estate? This was one of the very first intellectual property cases that came up after Elvis died. Another interesting case in this book is about Elvis's piano. He had this grand piano, and it was shortly after Elvis died, a collector bought the piano from the Elvis estate, and he leased it back to Graceland with the understanding that the piano would not be used to make money. It was just going to be there in Graceland. And this was okay. So everything went fine for several years, but then the owner of the piano found out that the gift shop at Graceland was selling postcards with pictures of the piano on it. And so he considered this a breach of contract, so he sued the Elvis estate to get the piano back. Another case, kind of interesting case, involves RCA, Elvis's record company. A small, rather obscure magazine decided to do a promotion to try to improve subscription. And so for new subscribers, they would send them this little cheap plastic phonograph record that had a few minutes of an Elvis interview that he did early in his career on a radio station. Well, RCA sued this magazine because they had a contract with the Presley estate that all recordings were to be issued by RCA. Now, the magazine argued that agreement only applied to music and not to spoken word, because Elvis didn't sing on this, it was just a radio interview. And so that became a legal challenge as well. Another case involves actually Elvis's death certificate. After Elvis died, there was an autopsy done, and the local medical examiner issued a report saying that Elvis had died from a heart attack. What he didn't tell anybody is that Elvis had all these different drugs in his body. Somewhere around 12 or 13 different drugs were in Elvis's system at the time of his death, and his heart attack was almost certainly caused by some kind of interaction with those drugs. Well, when the truth came out, when people found out, two of his bodyguards released a book explaining that Elvis had all these drug problems. Well, when that happened, the Board of Supervisors of the county in which Elvis lived sued the medical examiner department and the Department of Records, trying to get an investigation done because they suspected that the medical examiner may have tried to cover up Elvis's drug problems in order to kind of whitewash his reputation. And so the lawsuit was, do they have the right to investigate or not? Was there enough wrongdoing to justify a lawsuit? So there's cases like that. There's one more I want to talk about, and this one in a little bit of detail because I found it the most interesting one, and it deals with some unsold concert tickets. Elvis died in the middle of August in 1977, quite suddenly. He had planned to do two concerts in his hometown of Memphis at the Coliseum there at the end of the month. And they'd already sold a whole bunch of tickets for both shows. And of course, he dies and he can't do the show. So the concert promoter in charge of this tour offers a refund. You turn in your tickets and they'll refund your money. But about half the people that bought tickets did not turn in the tickets. They kept the tickets probably for sentimental reasons, as a souvenir. Here's a ticket for a show Elvis died before he could go to. And so there was quite a bit of money that was unclaimed. And then there was a big dispute about who gets the money. The Presley estate and the concert promoter said, that's our money because we raised it. But the Coliseum and the city of Memphis and the state of Tennessee argued that that money belonged to the taxpayers. And this actually went around back and forth. There were legal arguments back and forth for 10 years. By the time the case finally came to court, 10 years after Elvis's death, the money had been sitting in an escrow account, and by then it was worth over $320,000. So quite a bit of money. This especially, that's a lot of money now, but it was a whole lot of money in the 1980s when this case came out. Well, the judge who decided the case after hearing the arguments ruled that most of the money should go to the concert promoter and to the Presley estate, but $56,000 of the unsold ticket money would go to the Coliseum, because in the contract that Elvis had signed, that's how much money the Coliseum was supposed to get to pay for lights and and crowd control and everything else. Well, the state of Tennessee appealed this decision, and it went to an appellate court, and the appellate court threw out the judge's ruling. They ruled that all the money should go to the state of Tennessee. Their decision was that Elvis's death voided the contract. So the Presley estate and the promoter had no right to that money, and all the money should have gone to the state as unclaimed assets. In Tennessee, if you don't claim an asset within 7 years, then you lose the right to claim it. Now, what I find interesting about this is there was an almost identical case in North Carolina. Same situation. Elvis had sold tickets for a concert in North Carolina. He died before he could do it, and there was a bunch of unclaimed ticket money left over. And again, the Presley estate and the state of North Carolina sued each other to try to get that money. And what happened in that case is the courts and the judges and the courts in North Carolina ruled the exact opposite. They ruled that the Presley estate was entitled to that money and not the state of Tennessee. So you have two similar cases with completely different rulings. And so what happens now? What happens if some famous singer dies and doesn't do a concert and there's a bunch of unsold ticket money? Who gets it? And the answer is it depends on what state you're in. Okay. So if this sounds like an interesting book to you, these books, by the way, are written by the Bar Association, written by lawyers in the American Bar Association, but they're written for a mass audience. They do have some legal terms, but they're not written in legalese. They're written in ordinary language, and they're written in a rather lighthearted style. Some of them are quite humorous. And so if these cases sound like they'd be interesting to you, you might want to read this book. It's certainly an unusual Elvis book. There's tons of books about Elvis Presley out there, but this is really unusual because it doesn't deal with Elvis per se. It deals with his estate and various legal squabbles, and it brings up more serious questions, more broader questions about intellectual property rights and copyright laws. Another one I forgot to mention real quickly, there was a documentary sold about Elvis's life. This was back in the days when they had video cassettes. It wasn't shown on television, but it was sold directly to people on video cassettes, and it contained short little clips, 20, 30 seconds of Elvis's movies and some of his concerts. Well, the Presley estate sued that company to prevent them from selling those tapes, arguing that it was a violation of copyright law. But the company that sold the videos said that 30-second clip should fall within what's called fair use. You're allowed to make brief, like for example, if you're doing a book review, you can make brief quotes from a book as part of a book review. That's considered fair use. If you're selling, like iTunes sells songs and they have like 30-second clips of songs, that's considered fair use. And so the court had to decide whether these videos were legal or whether they were an illegal violation of the Presley estate. So if this sounds like a book you'd be interested in, you might want to pick it up. The book is The Little Book of Elvis Law. The author is Cecil C. Couln. The the third. And this has been the first Man in Gray book review. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you again next time.